What's up, guys? Jesse Montano, Meghan Angley here after a painful, brutal NHL draft. Did just finish up about an hour ago, Meghan. The Avs come away with 3 picks on the weekend. We just heard from Chris McFarland, Nick Pryor. I'm going to start with the way that we started the conversation with the guys that we talked to. What did you think of this weekend? The draft, new format, decentralized. What'd you think?
Well, I'm biased because it's through a media lens, and this was not favorable for media to cover the draft. It was hard to stay engaged, and maybe some of that was the Avs having so few picks. But I think that the flow is what I found to be most problematic about the format this weekend. It wasn't very entertaining. It wasn't very consistent. I didn't like the way they executed with the interviews in day one, first round. I expected there to be interviews, and I can see value in interviews as a media person. I have to see the value in that, right? But the way it was executed, it just really fell flat in a lot of ways. So it was difficult to appreciate this weekend, and I typically love it, but I love it because of it centering around the young men whose dreams are coming true. I think it's such a special moment for them, and this format really seemed to take away from that moment a little bit for the players, and that bummed me out.
I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, I actually that's a lie. I can't agree with you more because I think everything you just said, but I don't think it's a bias from a media perspective. Meghan, I think this was a miss on every possible level. I think it missed for media. I think it missed for fans. I think it missed for teams. And to your point, I think most of all, it missed for the players. I feel so bad for I don't feel that bad for the kids that got drafted this week. They got drafted. That's awesome. But like you said, this was supposed to be such a special moment for them to be there, to be embraced by their new organization and you know, have this moment they've worked so hard for. But instead, it was just turned into this awkward, drawn out, I saw people saying cringy a lot yesterday for the first round with those horribly awkward Zoom meet and greets between the player and the new team. I think this was a disaster for the league from start to finish. I think if you're one of the 26 teams that voted against it, you should be embarrassed. I think if you're one of the people who put together how this weekend went, you should be embarrassed. This has to be so much better if this is how you're going to do it. What hockey people really loved is the fact that not only was it, being at the draft, but it was different. The NHL is the only draft where we're all in person and we treat the players the way that we treat them, and everyone's there and you get to talk to everybody. And we even heard Nick Pryor say, like, you don't get a sense for what's going on. Because people, I saw a lot of folks on Twitter like, oh, media is just upset because they can't spy on everyone's table. The teams do that as well. And so I just think this was a miss all around. For me personally, I hope they take it back to how it was before. But if they don't, and because I'm not saying that there's not any positives to take out of this. All the teams are now, they're already home. They all get to get in their own cars and drive home. You have development camp and stuff like that. So I'm not saying that there isn't any positive to take out of it, but if you are going to do it this way again, you have to completely scrap what you just did and go back to the drawing board. This was a huge miss for the NHL all weekend. And like what you said, is what is one of my favorite events all year. They turned it into something where it's like, I have no interest in participating in this this weekend. So it sounds like the Avs, I don't know if they quite felt as strongly as I just did. Didn't sound like they quite loved it either, but they were much more PR friendly in saying that.
Yeah, but I think even dropping the notes about not being able to see everyone as maybe a negative of doing it this way, it's clear to me that not everybody was in love with this format, including some of the teams and their front offices.
Yeah,
I think they wanted privacy and to save money, but there are things that are missing from this formula.
100%. And, I can't remember who it was, but on the NHL Network desk, they were saying, like, look, I get it, saving the money and all that stuff, but they made a good point that I did think was interesting. It's something that I can't relate to. He said, look, your scouts go all over the world to these tiny little cold rinks, and they trudge through snow and small little puddle jumper planes and, nasty weather and crummy hotels and small cities and all that stuff. The draft is supposed to be the one weekend where it's like, yep, not only are we, making our picks, we're celebrating you guys, the scouts. We're taking you out golfing. We're going to these nice places. Everyone's going to get to be together. I just think there was so much about what people love about this weekend completely stripped away. And then on top of all that, it went for about twice as long on both days as normal. For a league that knows it has a problem with being too drawn out, you can't have that.
Yeah, it wasn't substantive either. That's what made it hard. It wasn't entertaining, and there were technical issues.
Yeah.
It captured the not personal aspect of like the COVID draft where everyone's zooming in. And that was like the least good part of that format
right.
to have reinforced in this. So after what was such a success at the Sphere a year ago, it was really punctuated then by how different this was and how not entertaining. And you could just see, I don't know, even in the player reactions, I think the Sphere was the best venue for it.
Yeah, and I mean, you remember we were there last year and all the chatter was, how do they possibly top this? Oh, by making it the worst one that we've had, maybe ever. So that's how we felt about how the draft actually went. Megan, I even told you before, and I'm being genuine here. Obviously, we're going to talk about it. But I told you, I said, this being such a drawn-out process, I don't even want to talk about the draft. So I'm going to let you start. The Avs had 3 picks. Yeah, you and I have different views on prospects and stuff like that. How do you think the Avs did this weekend?
Well, the Charlie Coyle Miles Wood trade, we talked about it. Well, actually, we didn't get to talk about it.
I was going to say, I talked about it. You were in the car. Well, hold on. Let's just start with their picks, and I want to circle back to that trade as a whole.
Well, the reason I'm bringing it up is because they wouldn't have their 3rd round pick today. Well, it's tonight. If not for this trade. So that's the only reason I'm making mention of it.
But I do want to circle back and get your full thoughts on it. But yeah.
And I think it's intriguing then what they decide to do with a 3rd round pick that they otherwise would not have had going into this weekend in Francesco Dell'Elce out of UMass. A really impressive freshman year out of this young defenseman. I know for draft age, he's not quite young, but I think the Avs are onto something in terms of what it is that they're looking
for. Second year in a row that they've taken an overager with their first pick in the draft.
And goaltending, that makes so much sense for that position, but I think it makes a lot of sense for defensemen too, especially when you look at where the organization is at with their current defensemen and even the defensemen in the pipeline like Guliev and hopefully Barons with a healthy season to come this next year, that a player like this doesn't need to be ready to make a difference in the organization within the next couple of years. And so he can complete the full college experience. Their play-by-play guy compared his trajectory to Sam Malinsky, completing the full 4 years at college and then looking at turning pro. And I think that's exactly the kind of path that Francesco would be on as a defenseman, because the raw tools that are there are certainly intriguing. A 6'1" left-handed defenseman who could stand to use his physicality a little bit more, but has such a natural offensive instinct and plays a transition style game. It makes so much sense with the way the Colorado Avalanche like to play defensively. Those tools could translate well to what they're looking to do in the future, and he's time to marinate. And so this isn't something that is going to be demanded of him soon. But what is impressive to me in thinking about what I know about the NCAA and defensemen, getting minutes as a freshman is already kind of hard to do.
Impressive numbers too for a freshman year.
So he led all defensemen on the team, quarterbacked their power play, because that offensive instinct and vision comes very naturally to him. So he's more a second pair role with a Detroit Red Wings prospect. And he ate up huge minutes, big matchups, obviously getting some opportunity on special teams with the power play. A lot of responsibility then entrusted to a defenseman to not only get starting opportunities, second pair minutes, but also be trusted with a power play. And obviously that offensive instinct is why he led all defensemen in points. There's something interesting about the method behind this then. I think too, picking 2 defensemen in today's draft is intriguing to me too, that they're loading up that part of the pipeline, replenishing it a bit. And I'll be curious to see then, at 20 years old, just turned 20, there's still a lot of time, and he doesn't need to be an NHL player tomorrow, and I think that's the point.
Well, and what is funny to me, because again, when we spoke to Nick prior, he said, like, we think this kid might actually be close to being able to, not saying he necessarily will, but like take that next step. And it's not that I disliked the 4th and 7th round pick. I didn't have like a problem with him, but again, just like my philosophy, this was the one pick of the 3 they made that I was like, I really like that. For a lot of what you're talking about in terms of the way that we see defensemen develop, and they do take that little bit longer track to get a guy who's a little bit older, got great size to him. And, again, I talked on yesterday morning after the trade saying, like, look, this was a draft I didn't do a ton of draft prep for because we were coming into the weekend with the Avs on a 4th and a 7th. So, I kind of immediately start looking into this kid, and you see his size, and your first, I was like, wow, good size for a defenseman. And then you start seeing what a lot of people say about him. Good skater, great puck mover, plays well on both ends of the ice. Like you said, quarterback's a power play for UMass. I like the fact that they are taking this approach where I made that comment off the top, like we view prospects differently. Part of my thing, when you, especially once you start getting to the 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round, 6th round, these are lottery scratchers. You have no idea. You can scout. You can you can think everything you want to think about what this player's projection is. It's really hard to predict what these kids at 17, 18 years old. It's really hard to predict what they're going to be like, not only when they get older, but once they start playing against grown men, older competition, bigger, faster, stronger. What I like about what the Avs have done here, like I said, last year with Ilya Nabokov in the 2nd round, goalie, so different, but 20 years old, playing in the KHL, playing against bigger, stronger competition. Now this year, 20 years old, defenseman, playing in the NCAA, bigger, stronger competition. These are positions, defense and goaltender, that take a little bit longer, and you want to see them play against that, for me at least, that next level of competition. And the Avs are plucking guys out that, yeah, maybe they went undrafted before once or twice, but you're now plucking guys out that you're getting a better idea of who and what they are, rather than 17, 18-year-old kids who still have, another year of major junior eligibility or still haven't gone to college to see how it's like. I like the fact it feels a little bit more sure in what you're scouting.
And I think the program has a lot of trust in developing defensemen specifically.
Yeah.
And what they're doing with him, too, to round out the defensive side of his game, which is the area of his game that's most raw, to be quite honest with you. And talking about that size, it's an aspect of his game he could utilize more. His skating is so good that he can take away time and space and just be a little bit smarter defensively. And so I think being trusted with the top matchups in that second pair role is exactly how he refines those qualities. And his coach, because ever since going back to like Drew Hellison and Colby Ambrosio, I've had interest in Hockey East, and then obviously Taylor McCarr in Maine this last year. This is a player that I have vague but some familiarity with. It is impressive to have this freshman season when you think about the quality of competition that exists just within Hockey East. And the improvement then for a player like Francesco is in his puck management and mitigating risk and making smarter decisions, because his offensive instinct can be a little bit of a high wire act, and that's a high risk player that can be fun to watch. And if you can get that refined and more rounded out by the end of his college career, then you have such a balanced defenseman with a lot to offer offensively, and that does become very exciting. And going back to this trade yesterday, I know a lot of people were sad to see a prospect like Will Zellers as part of that Middlestat Coyle trade going back to last year. That was a 3rd round pick at 76 for the Avs. They get a pick in 77, now a 3rd round pick. They turn it into now a defensive prospect. And so they also regained a 2nd in next year's draft, which was also part of that return to get Coyle this last season. I think they've neutralized a lot of the Charlie Coyle trade with everything that has been the fallout. And I know maybe that doesn't instill a lot of confidence in people.
Oh, it should.
But it should. That's really smart asset management, draft management, on behalf of the Avs front office then, to kind of recoup this in different ways on every layer of this trade. And you have now an interesting defensive prospect, whereas Zellers, an interesting forward prospect that billed as a center, played a little bit more as a wing this last year, obviously a top scorer in the USHL. I'm not going to pretend that was nothing. But also you got Gavin Brinley, who by all accounts fell from the 1st round to the top of the 2nd. that's just sort of a cherry on top, too. So it's not that you just neutralized aspects of this trade that you maybe didn't love. You gained a Gavin Brinley and also a Francesco. So I'm pretty happy with the business that the Avs have done coming out of this weekend. We didn't even talk about Linus Funk, another player that I think will be a sneaky...
I was going to get there next.
Because you said that Francesco might have been your favorite part. I think Linus Funk might be my favorite part of this weekend in terms of what an 18-year-old player already has in every area of his game. It's such a good starting point. Like, maybe it's not jumping off the page in one way, but he is such a smart two-way player and a right-handed defenseman. And he's huge. He's 6'3". That's just a different look. You know, we've got the Sean Barons, we've got the Guliev in the pipeline already as the kind of smaller puck-moving defenseman. This is just a different type of defenseman that's now represented in the defensive.
Francesco also 6'3", right?
6'1".
Do I have that backwards in my head then? Because I could have sworn he was 6'3". I'm taking your word for it. Your laptop is open.
Both
but,
over 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
So now you have different size, physicality represented in the defensive prospect pipeline, and I really like the variety.
See, and the reason I say that is because, and again, I don't know, maybe this is me being jaded, you know, for 20 years seeing a prospect being like, oh man, that's going to be awesome, then never hear me again. I'm skeptical of anybody that age. You know, especially with that size, it's easy for a player to stand out amongst their peers, being physically imposing like that. Playing in the USHL, you're playing at 16, 17, 18-year-olds. What's his next move?
Linus Funk?
Yeah.
He's going to continue on in, like, the junior Swedish league.
Oh, okay. That's right. My fucking head is... See, this is what has happened to me.
First of all, you're doing this purely off of memory recall, so that would be hard.
Well, why am I thinking USHL?
That's Nolan Road.
Okay,
the center,
all right.
Tri-City.
So I have details from all of them mixed. Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
But they each have good details.
So let me take another step back then, because I had my details messed up here. I'm with you. I do like, I mean, you've heard me say this for years. I always prefer take those Euro prospects. I like the leagues that they come from better. And I also, and this is changing finally, we actually haven't talked about this. Players are going to be able to play in the AHL now. You know, even if they are coming up through the CHL, USHL, things like that, they are going to be able to play in the American Hockey League. So that has always been something that I've really liked about getting involved with the European prospects. So I apologize to everyone here. Like I said, this draft has made my brain mush. USHL pick came at the end. I do like them reaching in to the Euro leagues, because that probably means that you're going to see him, Funk go through this progression of trying to work his way up through the leagues over there into the men's leagues. And I like those development tracks for prospects. But again, I just remain skeptical when you, especially a defensive or a goaltender prospect who is young like that. That's the main reason why I say I like the Francesco pick the most from this weekend. And it's, again, we've talked about it. I love that the Avs have, you only took 3 picks this weekend, but they found a way to circumvent that by going the college free agent route. And I've loved that they are going after these prospects who are a little bit older, a little bit closer to being able to contribute in the organization. That's my number one reason for liking the Francesco pick above the other 2 this weekend.
Well, and with Linus Funk, what I like is, of the picks this weekend, he's the draft age, like the draft, 18 years old.
Yeah.
But every account of what type of player he is poised and polished and smart and detailed. That is the kind of thing that sometimes young defensemen build into their game over time. To already have that foundation and priority around being a smart two-way player, I think is going to serve him so well. Alongside the size, I think that he's in such a good position to be an effective pro player. And it can be hard sometimes to have young defensemen build that dimension into their game. Heavy shot, a good defensive stick. That's just great to see in a young 18-year-old. And that leads us to our 19-year-old for the final pick for the Colorado Avalanche, 7th round, pick 214. Nolan Road, a center, just completed his last year in the USHL and will be going to St. Cloud next year. I was thinking about, too, the college free agents and some of the picks from this last year. A couple players, too, I'm curious to see if they'll be at development camp out of, I'm blanking on the name. It's a Minnesota college. Cooper Gay. And he was, Tommy's. Evan went there. St. Thomas.
Oh, Tommy. Okay, St. Thomas, yep.
Is that Minnesota? Or am I making that up?
St. Cloud, Minnesota.
St. Thomas. I feel like we have to record the whole podcast over again. It is Minnesota. Okay, perfect. Cooper Gay, one that I'm interested in. Anyways, Nolan Road, Mike Battaglia has his hands all over it. That was where I was going with this crazy segment, you guys. I really like the trust that he's earned with some of these NCAA guys. And so obviously Nolan Road has not played in college just yet, but this is a Minnesota player that he's had his eyes on and will be in a great program at St. Cloud. So with young centers, I never know what they're actually going to be at the pro level. There's still so much time. That's why I'm not doing as many backflips and cartwheels over this pick. But I mean, for a 7th round pick, you just want to see that become something that can help the Avs at some level in the organization someday.
Right. Yeah, we'll see. I really was, all jokes aside, I'm not trying to be funny or anything like that. I was really anticipating it, and honestly, I was even kind of looking forward to seeing the Avs get a little bit more creative with these draft picks, with these assets that they did go out and recuperate in that trade. I did not want to see them make all 3 picks. Again, this is just me, folks. That 4th and 7th and the 7th round pick, there's not a lot of value in it. I don't think you're going to see much return out of those players ever. And I think the minute you draft them, you start risking that it's a diminishing return. But of the picks they made, I'm with you. Road, we'll see. Definitely the biggest question mark. I think they made the most of the other 2 picks. And like I said, I've just become a really big fan of them going that college free agent route. So when you go in and you grab someone like Francesco in that 3rd round, that kind of mimics, that I know for college free agents are usually a little bit older, but again, just player that already has some college experience, a couple of years older. I like them going that route because I can see that path to being impactful for the organization much quicker than your standard draft picks that most teams are picking up this weekend.
Well, and he was projected, is maybe the better word for it, to be picked up in this draft because of the freshman year that he had. And so the way I see it is, one, another team was going to have interest in Francesco. And it's like getting a Sam Malinsky before he becomes a free agent, and now you have the signing rights.
Exactly.
And so you still expect this player to complete a lot of his time at college, if not all. I don't see the necessity to rush him through his development. And now you're just getting a little bit ahead of things, because I've seen a lot of sentiment around with the cap going up. There were fewer trades around the league because I think there is an emphasis on the value of internal options and picks moving forward because of this change. And I think that's interesting because the Avs have solved a lot of problems through trades in the past, and they obviously don't have a lot of draft capital moving forward. But it is important for them to just start making some picks, have some prospects in the cupboard that just start marinating to trade. No, see, every year we're like, Oscar Olausson, maybe Jean-Luc Foudy. Look at the room that we're in with both those players today, right? I mean, even a Drew Hellison, who was a highly touted defenseman for a prospect once upon a time, became Josh Manson. Like, it's really hard to say what these players will become, but it is important to have them to even toy with in conversation.
I mean, all jokes aside, to either replenish your pipeline or to use as dealable assets, like, all jokes aside, like, so you're right, it is crucial to have valuable assets. And for Francesco is another great, if he takes another step forward and then another step forward, maybe they do get him signed after his junior year. And you can put him in Loveland and continue that development track if he continues to go that way. But to your point, if not, there's no rush. You've got this guy's rights. You're getting ahead of what could be, what could have been, a high-end college free agent by the time it came to the end. But Francesco De Leche, how would you say it? De Leche? De Leche? De Leche? De Leche? Delelche. Round 3, the 13th pick in the 3rd round, 77th overall.
feel like you were making that way harder, and then the more you started saying it different ways, really scared me.
After the second one, then I was just kind of like joking. And then in the fourth round, 22nd pick in the fourth round, Linus Funk, 118th overall, and then Nolan Road, 7th round, 22 overall, pick 214. Yeah, Megan, I'm just this team needs guys that can contribute, not draft picks. That's why this weekend for me was like, let's get on with it. And then they wouldn't. The NHL just wouldn't get on with it. And of the picks they had, of the assets that they had, I think they made the best of them. Especially in a draft that it wasn't super exciting anyways in terms of what was out there, what was available. Any other thoughts on this weekend, on the draft?
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
I want to get your thoughts on the trade from yesterday.
Yeah.
Miles Wood, Charlie Coyle. You were busy running around. You were in the car, a lot of places when it happened. So I just kind of got on for 20, 25 minutes and just talked, kind of reacted as the deal came out. What did you think? I thought it was a great bit of business.
No, I do too. And I always try to weigh other people's criticisms, though, to keep myself even killed. Like, okay, well, what's the other side of this? Why are people perhaps not in love with this? And I think the criticism would just be everything that happened before this that necessitated it. Like, well, Casey Middlestat didn't pan out, and that's why you needed Charlie Coyle. And now you've lost Charlie Coyle. And so I, identified the ways in which they've kind of neutralized that. And I was spiraling a second ago thinking about, well, why did they need Casey Middlestat? Because Ryan Johansson didn't work out. And so I need to calm down for a second, because there have been things that have not panned out at the 2C position that have forced them to load up depth down the middle. Obviously, like Ross Colton once upon a time was ideally going to be a center option for the Avs. That turned into, down the line, a need for a Charlie Coyle. But even going back to last year, he was always described as a luxury to have as an option for your center on a third line. And I agreed with that. A little bit expensive for a third line center, to be honest with you, but I loved what he brought to the Avs. And people also point to the lack of production in the playoffs as maybe a reason that they're happy with it. I wouldn't be so quick to say as much, just because I think the Avs on the whole were stifled offensively.
Let me ask you a question. I'm going to cut you off and just ask you a question. It relates to everything you're saying. I saw a tweet yesterday that said, and it was from like a media account. It said the Avs get out from under the Charlie Coyle contract. I didn't think that it was that bad of a I didn't think it was something like, oh my God, they need to get out from under this. And I just thought that was such a weird way to paint Charlie Coyle's fit in Colorado.
I agree, because I think it was very intentional. They knew what kind of money he made and that he had another year left on that contract. I thought that was part of the appeal for them. And I think I tweeted out that McFarland cited optimism around Landeskog and his availability and health going into next year as part of the reason then Charlie Coyle became expendable. I think people misunderstood perhaps what I meant or what Chris McFarland meant in saying that. It's now having Gabriel Landeskog's money on the books. It's not going to be LTIR. He's a healthy player that's going to be made available to you next season. You have to account for that money. It's not necessarily that Gabe's presence in, hopefully, the top six really affects Charlie Coyle on the third line, but rather, now that you have Landeskog money to account for it in the lineup, you do have to then tighten the wallet a little bit about where that money is being spent throughout the rest. And so when Charlie Coyle joined, Gabriel Landeskog was not a certain thing, going back to when that trade happened. He was gearing up for a return. It was still not clear if he was going to actually be able to play hockey again. And so Charlie Coyle made a lot of sense then, and then they didn't have to worry about it going into the playoffs. Now they will in the future. But yeah, now this isn't a new problem, and so the Charlie Coyle that fit on the Avs after the deadline last year is not the Avs that are going to exist going into next year because they have a Landeskog.
Well, and not only that, you used the word luxury a minute ago. Like they could have made it work keeping Charlie Coyle, and you would have had a $5 million 3C. But I also think you have to keep in mind, like, Charlie Coyle is not really a 3C. Like, he hasn't been a 3C anywhere in his career up until he got to Colorado, and we'll see where he fits in the lineup with Columbus. But like, So yeah, it's like that feels expensive for a 3C, but like you got him because it was supposed to be this like. Do you know what I'm saying? Like he's a level above a third line center that
Right.
we're slotting in, not dissimilar to the Brad Marchand in Florida thing. It's like, yeah, this guy isn't normally a third line player, but that's where we're playing him, and what a luxury. So yeah, I think the Avs just sat there and said, yeah, it's a luxury. We have guys either currently in our organization, or we think we can go out and get one for significantly cheaper that will be perfectly effective on a third line. It was a luxury that they decided we don't need right now.
And honestly, I have a feeling they had a hard decision in saying we don't need. I think they really would have liked to address the third line because it was a huge issue coming out of these playoffs. And now there's even more to answer for then with this third line. Like, I'm not going to pretend that I had Miles Wood penciled in the third line for next year. So this was a necessary piece of business to get out from under that contract.
Yeah. Yep.
With still several years left on it, and he rendered himself, unfortunately, even out of the regular NHL rotation by the year's end, right? Like Jimmy Vesey had stepped up, Kivi Ranta had become just versatile enough, and then they kind of struck gold with what Parker Kelly could be and Jack Drury could be, that Miles Wood wasn't really necessary in the Avs bottom six anymore. And even with a Kivi Ranta going into free agency, whether or not he remains with the team, that's a replaceable role. But the third line still needed some juice, needed some jump. That's probably where keeping Charlie Coyle was still a part of the conversation till the final hour. I have a feeling that they really wanted that to be a part of the conversation next year. But now they've got to find a way to ensure that if Logan O'Connor isn't as available as they'd like him to be next year, they've got a way to fill a hole in a bottom six. And if Jonathan Drouin does go into free agency and prices himself out of Colorado, now they have a top six need to address on the wing. Like, getting Landeskog back is great, but you might have just lost a top six player to free agency. That's a really important part of the lineup that you don't want to punt on. And then there's the question marks around the bottom of the D-core, a Lindgren, that I think with Chris McFarland mentioning a few free agents by name today that the door isn't fully closed on them, Lindgren is one of them. They do have some work to done to tie up loose ends on the back end. That all three things that I just listed as holes to be filled, that's for Charlie Coyle. It doesn't make sense anymore. And Miles Wood, that's now very important money that they've loosened up, if I'm referring to Chris McFarland's own words, that I think they needed to.
And I mean, it's, we've seen the rumors. It is technically opened the door that they could take a bigger swing at a player if they wanted to, in some type of trade where you still have some money going out. But I don't necessarily know if they'll go that route. If nothing else, it has opened up the flexibility to either bring some of those players back or backfill those spots in as you lose some of these players to unrestricted free agency. So, like I said, I talked about it yesterday for about 25 minutes once we saw the return. I think it's a great bit of business. For 1 minute, I was thinking that they might have been able to pull a first out of that deal because Columbus had a couple banked, and I was like, oh man, if you can pull a first out of this, that is massive.
Right.
They weren't able to, but you get in. You now have 2 second-round picks in 2027 to play with. You got the pick that you already have used this weekend on a player that you and I both said that we liked. And then I'm not as high on Brinley. It's really, 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 really hard to play in the NHL at 5'9", even though he is it looks like just an Energizer bunny out there. I just think about Rocco Grimaldi, who is the same way. That dude had a motor that never stopped, and it's really hard to play in the NHL at that size. But it gives you an exciting prospect that people are high on the skill. It's a former second-round pick. Again, if nothing else, there's another asset for you in your organization.
Marco Rossi would like a word. Here's the thing, too. I have to out myself as someone who's not interested in Marco Rossi right now, and it was because of his size. But I want to clarify a few things. Apples to oranges, people, all right? Have a seat. Calm down. What I found difficult to sell me on Marco Rossi and the Avs having interest in him is a little bit where he would be trusted with the utilization that he's hoping for. That's the whole reason things aren't working out with him in Minnesota, and why they would open the door on conversations around him is because he wants to play a more elevated role. And Minnesota obviously had him just a little bit down. but he has an incredibly productive season. That's going to command a pretty big return that I just didn't want the Avs gambling on a player that is a bit undersized, though he did have a productive year. That's where the price was driven up on a player like Marco Rossi, because he can command it. It's his right after such a successful season in the NHL. With a player like Brinley, the role that I'm eyeing him for is very different, and the cost is completely different. And that's why, you know what? You're taking a gamble on the size with either player.
Yeah,
that's absolutely a truth. I wasn't thrilled about the cost of a Marco Rossi because I wasn't totally sold on the fit. And the age, too. Like, I think a young center is really hard to sell me on, especially on a contending team like the Avs. I think you don't win with kids, like Nathan McKinnon said. Gavin Brinley doesn't need to be the Avs third-line center next year, right? Like, this is an undersized winger, and I think his path to the NHL is going to be a bit more long, a bit more winding, and the cost to getting him here was very different from the room we'd be in with Marco Rossi. So that is what my defense is for Rossi versus Brinley. But I'll point to Rossi as I think that size is a gamble. I'm not going to say that it's a sure thing at 5'9" that Gavin Brinley can hang in the NHL, but I do think...
Well, I'm also saying that it's not a guarantee that he can't just because he's 5'9". Sorry,
Jesse's a hater.
That was me just saying that I'm saying that he can't.
He just wants
I'm
to be
not saying that he
contrarian,
can't.
you guys.
No, I just like I used to talk about Rocco Grimaldi all the time, because you'd go watch Rocco Grimaldi at practice and you'd be like, holy shit, this kid is nasty. Great speed, unbelievable hands. He'd have awesome finish. It's just really hard to be super competitive when you're that undersized and underweight. And again, I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm not saying that these aren't very talented players. My argument is always, whenever people are like, oh, that's not true, let me list the same 3 players that are under 5'10" that everyone else lists. Johnny Gaudreau, Martin St. Louis, and now Marco Rossi. It's a really small list, and if Gavin Brinley can make his way onto that list,
Yamamoto, Brad Marchand.
Do we really want to use Kylo Yamamoto as the example?
NHL years under his belt,
I know,
and he got phased out too. But also that's just kind of true of fringe NHL players 100%. Generally.
And that's what I'm just saying is, like, Gavin Brinley has obstacles he's got to overcome, and if he's a good enough player, he's going to. His size isn't going to matter. I'm just saying that for players that are not only undersized, because I think Brad Marchand's like 5'10", 5'11".
Have you stood next to him?
No.
Guys, I'm 5'9", and I've stood next to Brad Marchand.
Are you taller than him? Are you saying?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I guess I've never been that up close to him. Were you wearing your heels?
Yeah, and I know I'm 5'9" without him, so.
Again, point being, there's extra obstacles there. That is just harder for those undersized players to overcome.
Short Kings, get behind me. Don't listen to Jesse.
Short Kings, get behind her. I'm 5'8".
Short Kings, get behind me. I'll protect you.
I got to do the rest of the pod from over here, I guess.
Gavin Brinley. All right. I'm excited about his work ethic, his motor, and the pro habits that were built into his game. Michigan, great program. What I like, too, is his ability to hang with top talent, right? Like playing alongside the likes of Adam Fantilli. It's one thing to just be a player who works hard, and it's another to have the puck skill to play with, keep up with players that are of Adam Fantilli's caliber. And so I really like that about Brinley. I think it makes him versatile. And I think, too, that work ethic that he has, it's what's going to take him to that next level, separate him from his peers, because you're right. He has a lot of work to do and a lot to separate from his other peers who have also excelled at every level of hockey before this. And I think, his first year pro was challenging for him. I'm not going to lie. And there's a lot then that still needs to be answered for with Brinley's path to the NHL. But I'm excited to see what he becomes, because I think that the skill upside in this player is extremely exciting.
I've got 2 questions. Was Fantilli playing with the Monsters last year? No?
No.
I'll say, because Gavin didn't play with the Jackets.
He got his NHL debut.
Yeah.
But he was in the American League last year.
All right.
But Fantilli, I'm talking about in college.
Oh my God. I'm sorry. I was like, one of us is going crazy.
Do we need to redo the whole podcast?
And then here's the other thing last thing I'm going to say on Brinley. As I said at the beginning, the thing with undersized players like Brinley and Rocco Grimaldi that I mentioned earlier, the skill that you have to possess to even get yourself to this point, having those other obstacles and stuff to overcome, it's unbelievable. Like how sheerly talented these players are.
Earn minutes on a line with Fantilli in a program like Michigan, which is kind of
and
like...
you even said Michigan, and I just completely missed that.
But like, think about the internal competition that exists at Michigan, right? To be getting that opportunity then alongside a Fantilli. Like, you really do have to separate from your peers in that environment. And
you've got to be a special player at that size.
NCAA is a little tricky. You're still playing around a lot of young men, so the size and the speed is not like the pro level, but I'm not going to pretend it's nothing either, right? Like, you've got 23, 24-year-olds kicking around the NCAA too, so you still have to kind of keep up 100%. With things at that level, and I think that's why his first year pro in the American League for Brinley was a bit challenging for him, because I know there are other players that come to mind that are undersized that have kind of leveled out at the AHL level that I'm thinking of off the top of my head.
Sounds like a hater now.
No, and it worries me. It worries me. It's like, you are so good in this league. Why doesn't that translate to the next? Gavin Brinley just has to answer that question.
Yeah. All right, let's wind it down here. Any final thoughts from this weekend? I just posted a clip of you asking Chris McFarland about coach openings. You said there was a lot of interest. You and I keep talking like, awesome, a lot of interest. Well, a lot of these people are getting hired.
From who?
Right. Who's left that's still interested? Any final thoughts, stuff that C-Mac said, stuff that Nick Pryor said? We'll be back at it on Tuesday with another pod, and we have Dev Camp all next week, so this is definitely not the last you've heard of us coming out of all this, but just final thoughts for this weekend.
I really wanted them to have at least one of the vacancies filled by today. Going into development camp, it's important to have coaching staff.
Yeah, people there to help coach your players.
So it gives me some nerves, but I have to imagine that an organization like the Colorado Avalanche can have its pick of the litter with candidates. And so even though a lot of the names I'm familiar with have come off the board, I hope they surprise me in a really great way, and I hope they do it soon because they do have a camp to run.
That's going to do it. We do have a full week of development camp, 3 on-ice days. Guys are starting to get in town as soon as this weekend, so this should be a fun one. We'll be back at the rink. This is a little bit the false start of the off season. It's like, we're back at the rink. Here we go for 3 days and then nothing for a couple months.
But we'll keep talking.
You can't get rid of us that easily. She's Megan. I'm Jesse. Got Mark behind the lens here today at an interesting looking ball arena. No doubt about it. The 2025 NHL Draft weekend has come to a close. Avs take home 3 picks and get some nice business done on the NHL side. Looking forward to next week being back at the rink. She's Megan. I'm Jesse. We'll see you guys there.
Bye.
Bye.